I delivered food for pocket change, hoping to save my dying mother. Then, one impossible order took me to the mansion of a reclusive billionaire, where a single photograph revealed a past that shattered everything I knew. The city air always tasted of exhaust fumes and broken dreams, a flavor I knew all too well. My world was a 10-block radius of cracked pavement and takeout orders, navigated on a beat-up scooter that coughed more than my mother on a bad day. Every delivery was a race against the clock, not for the company, but for us. A $5 tip could mean an extra day of her medication. A complaint could mean choosing between rent and the electricity bill. It was a life lived on the edge of a knife, and I was getting tired of balancing. My mom, Eleanor, was my whole world. She was sunshine trapped in a failing body, her spirit still bright even as a chronic illness slowly dimmed her light. We lived in a cramped two-room apartment that always smelled faintly of the herbal remedies she insisted on trying. Her medical bills were a mountain, and my delivery job was a tiny shovel, chipping away at an impossible peak. She used to tell me stories, not of princes and castles, but of hard work and resilience. "It's always been just you and me, Alex," she'd say, her hand cool on my forehead. "We're a team." She never, ever spoke of my father, or of her life before I was born. It was a closed book, and I'd learned not to ask. That evening, the call came in an hour before my shift ended. The address made my stomach clench. Sterling Hill. The whole city knew that name. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a local legend. A fortress of solitude perched on the highest point overlooking the city, owned by the reclusive billionaire Mr. Sterling. People whispered stories about him that he hadn't left the grounds in a decade, that he was eccentric, heartbroken, or just plain cruel. No delivery service ever went up there. They had their own staff for everything. But tonight, for some reason, our little Speedy Eats app pinged with an order from the ghost of Sterling Hill himself. The ride up was like ascending to another planet. The crumbling city streets gave way to smooth, private asphalt. The air grew cleaner, scented with pine and manicured lawns. Massive wrought iron gates, adorned with a silent, imposing S, hissed open as I approached, as if a hidden eye was watching me. The driveway was longer than my entire street, winding through a forest of perfectly sculpted trees until the house finally came into view. It wasn't a house. It was a monument to wealth, a palace of glass and stone that glittered under the twilight sky, yet felt completely cold and lifeless. I parked my sputtering scooter near a marble fountain that was probably worth more than my entire life. My worn-out sneakers felt like a sacrilege on the polished stone steps. I lifted the insulated bag, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just wanted to drop the food, get the money, and leave this place that felt like it could swallow me whole. The heavy oak door swung open before I even knocked. Standing there was a man who looked older and smaller than the legends suggested. He was tall, but stooped, with silver hair and eyes that held a profound, ancient sadness. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, but they hung on him with an air of effortless expense. This was Alistair Sterling. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Sorry, sir." "Traffic," I mumbled, holding out the bag. He ignored it, his gaze sweeping over me, lingering for a fraction of a second too long. It was an unnerving look, like he was searching for something in my face. He finally took the bag, his long, bony fingers brushing against mine. A strange jolt, like static electricity, passed between us. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket. "Keep the change," he said, his voice flat. My mind reeled. The order was $32. This was a $68 tip. This was a week's worth of medication. "Sir, I can't." "Just set the containers on the console table in the foyer," he commanded, turning his back and walking inside, leaving the door ajar. He didn't seem to care if I followed or not. Hesitantly, I stepped over the threshold. The inside of the mansion was vast and silent. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. A grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows, and the marble floor echoed my every nervous footstep. The console table he'd pointed to was a gleaming piece of dark wood. As I carefully placed the food containers on it, my eyes were drawn to the wall above the massive unlit fireplace. It was covered in photographs in ornate silver frames, pictures of a younger Mr. Sterling with important-looking people, on yachts, at galas, living a life I couldn't even imagine. But my gaze snagged on one photo in the very center, larger than the rest. It was a professional portrait, beautifully lit. In it, a much younger, happier Alistair Sterling stood with his arm around a woman. She was breathtaking. Her hair was a cascade of dark curls, her smile was radiant, and her eyes sparkled with a joy so pure it felt like it could leap from the frame. My breath hitched in my throat. The world tilted on its axis. The insulated bag slipped from my numb fingers and hit the marble floor with a soft thud. I knew that smile. I saw a faded version of it every single day. I knew those eyes, though I'd only ever seen them clouded with pain and fatigue. It was my mother. My sick, tired, world-weary mother, Eleanor. But this was an Elena I had never seen before. Vibrant, impossibly young, and standing in the embrace of a billionaire. Mr. Sterling had turned, his brow furrowed at the sound of the dropped bag. He saw where I was looking. The air grew thick with a silence that stretched for an eternity. The question tore from my lips before I could stop it, a choked whisper that echoed in the cavernous hall. That photo. On the mantel. Why do you have a picture of my mom? Alistair Sterling's face, which had been a mask of bored indifference, fractured. For a split second, I saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Shock, pain, and a flicker of something that looked like fear. The silence in the cavernous foyer became a physical weight, pressing down on me. He took a half step back, his gaze darting from my face to the photograph, then back again, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice regaining its cold, steely edge. He was rebuilding his fortress wall by wall, brick by brick. "That is a photo of someone I knew a long time ago. Now take your money and leave my property." He gestured dismissively towards the door, a king banishing a peasant from his court. But I couldn't move. The sight of my mother, so full of life and light in that silver frame, had anchored me to the spot. All the years of unanswered questions, of seeing her struggle, of feeling that missing piece of my life, coalesced into a single point of raw courage. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I'm not mistaken. Her name is Elena. She has a tiny crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell as a little girl. In that picture, she's wearing the silver locket she gave to me, the one she said was the only thing she had left from her past." Every word I spoke was a hammer blow against his composure. The color drained from his face. He stared at me, truly staring this time, his gaze intense and searching. He wasn't looking at a delivery boy anymore. He was looking for a ghost. His eyes scanned my features, the shape of my jaw, the set of my eyes, the dark wave of my hair. I saw the moment of recognition dawn, a flicker of horrified understanding. In my face he saw hers. "Who are you?" he breathed, the words barely audible. "I'm her son," I said, my throat tight. "I'm Alex." Alistair Sterling looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He staggered back and leaned against the grand console table for support, his knuckles white as he gripped the polished wood. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, the billionaire was gone. In his place was just an old, broken man. "Come with me," he said, his voice raspy. He turned without waiting for an answer and walked towards a set of tall, dark doors I hadn't noticed before. I hesitated for only a second before following him, leaving the $100 bill and the cooling food forgotten on the floor. He led me into a vast library. Bookshelves soared 2 stories high, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and knowledge. A fire crackled in a hearth big enough to stand in, casting flickering shadows across the room. He sank into a deep leather armchair near the fire and gestured for me to take the one opposite. I felt ridiculously out of place, my cheap jacket and worn jeans a stain on the opulent tapestry of the room. "You say she's alive?" he asked, his voice hollow. He stared into the flames, not at me. "She's alive," I confirmed, a bitter edge to my voice. "But she's not well. She's been sick for years. The doctors, they don't know exactly what it is, but it takes all her energy. We can barely afford the medication, let alone the specialist she needs to see." The words just tumbled out. I wasn't trying to guilt him. I was just telling him the truth, the grim reality of the life that woman in the photograph had been living. He flinched as if I'd physically struck him. He finally turned his gaze from the fire to me, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I looked for her," he whispered, "for years, after she left. It was like she vanished from the face of the earth. I hired the best investigators money could buy. Nothing. It was as if she never existed." "She didn't want to be found," I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. My mother hadn't just moved on, she had run. She had erased her past, and this man, this palace, was what she was running from. "What were you to her?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why did she leave? Are you—" The question that had been a formless void my entire life was finally on my lips. "Are you my father?" Alistair Sterling didn't answer immediately. He just watched me, his expression a storm of regret and sorrow. The fire crackled, filling the tense silence. He reached for a crystal decanter on a nearby table, poured a measure of amber liquid with a trembling hand, and downed it in one go. "The answers you want are complicated, Alex," he finally said, his voice strained. "They are tied to a past filled with pain and mistakes. My mistakes." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Telling you everything right now could destroy what little peace your mother has left." "Peace?" I scoffed, a raw, humorless laugh escaping me. "She's in pain every single day. She worries about the bills, about me, about whether she'll have the strength to get out of bed tomorrow. That's not peace. That's a slow, agonizing defeat." He winced, absorbing the truth of my words. He stood up and began to pace in front of the fireplace, a caged lion in his own gilded prison. He stopped and turned to face me, his decision made. His eyes were clear now, filled with a terrifying resolve. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. This ends now." He walked over to a heavy oak desk, pulled out a checkbook and a pen. "I will give you everything you need. A blank check. The best doctors in the world, flown in from anywhere. A new home, a new life for you both. I will pay for it all." My head was spinning. It was the answer to every prayer I'd ever whispered into the dark. It was a miracle. But I could see the hook hidden in the bait. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. He looked at me, his gaze piercing, his expression deadly serious. "The catch," he said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial hush, "is a condition. You must swear, on your life you will never break. She can have the money, the doctors, the cure, but she can never ever know where it came from. She can never know that you and I have met. To her, Alistair Sterling must remain dead and buried in the past." The air in the library grew thick, heavy with the weight of his impossible proposition. A blank check. The best doctors in the world. A cure for my mother. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, a fantasy made real, offered to me on a silver platter. But the price was a lie that I would have to live every single day, a secret that would sit between my mother and me like a wall of glass. "Why?" The word was barely a whisper. "If you care about her, if you want to help her, why can't she know? Why do you have to be a ghost?" Alistair Sterling sank back into his armchair, the brief surge of resolve draining out of him, leaving him looking frail and old. He aged a decade right before my eyes. "Because, Alex," he said, his voice ragged with an ancient pain. "The last time she saw me, she was running for her life. And she wasn't running from me. She was running from what I represented, from the danger that came with being tied to the Sterling name." My mind reeled. The stories my mom had told me were always about simplicity and quiet struggle. This talk of danger felt like a scene from a movie, completely disconnected from the reality of our cramped apartment and her worn-out cardigans. "I don't understand. What kind of danger?" He stared into the fire, his eyes distant, lost in a memory I couldn't access. "My family, my father. We didn't build this empire with clean hands. There were rivals, enemies, people who believed we had taken what was rightfully theirs. When I was young, I was arrogant. I thought our money and power made us invincible. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a chilling self-loathing. Your mother taught me otherwise. She was pure light in a world of shadows. She saw the good in me, the man I wanted to be, not the name I carried. But the shadows have long arms. An incident occurred. A threat was made, one that was terrifyingly specific. It named her directly. I was told that if I didn't back out of a certain business deal, she would be taken from me, permanently. A cold dread washed over me. I thought of my mother, so fragile now, and pictured her caught in a web of corporate warfare and violent threats. It was unthinkable. I tried to protect her, he continued, his voice cracking. I hired security, moved her to a safe house, but it only made her a prisoner. She saw the truth then, that being with me meant living in a golden cage, always looking over her shoulder. The joy I saw in her eyes, the joy you see in that photograph, it started to die. So one night she left. She disappeared without a trace, leaving only a note saying she was choosing life over love. She was saving herself. And, I believe, she was saving you. The last words hung in the air. Saving you. Was I born then? Did she leave while she was pregnant? The questions multiplied, each one more painful than the last. He was my father. He had to be. But he was also the reason my mother's life had been one of constant struggle, a life lived in hiding. So you just let her go? I asked, an accusation coloring my tone. You had all this wealth, all this power, and you just let her vanish into a life of poverty and sickness. I had no choice, he roared, slamming his fist on the arm of the chair, the sudden violence startling me. Don't you understand? If they knew she existed, if they knew you existed, you would have become leverage, a weapon to be used against me. Her disappearing was the only thing that kept you both safe. My investigators reported back that all trails went cold. I convinced my enemies and myself that she was gone for good. I buried her memory and became the recluse everyone whispers about. It was my penance, my cage. He stood and walked to the massive window that overlooked the glittering city below, a city where my mother was fighting for every breath. Her being dead to this world is what has protected her all these years. If word gets out that Eleanor is alive, that the son of Alistair Sterling exists, those old ghosts may just decide to come back, and this time I might not be able to stop them. The choice he presented was monstrous. A silent benefactor, a lottery win, an anonymous donation. That's what I would have to tell her. I would have to watch her get better, see the light return to her eyes, all while carrying the secret of the man who was both her greatest love and her deepest fear. But the alternative, watching her fade away day by day while I clung to a truth that could put her in danger, there was no alternative. Okay, I said, my voice hoarse. I agree. She will never know. Relief washed over his features, so profound it was almost painful to watch. He strode back to the desk, his movements now energized and purposeful. He scribbled on the check, his pen flying across the paper. He didn't write a number, he just signed his name, Alistair Sterling, a signature that could move mountains, and handed it to me. This is for the immediate expenses. My personal banker will contact you tomorrow. He will set up a trust. It will be untraceable. All you have to do is tell him what you need. I stared at the signed check in my hand. It felt heavier than a block of gold. It was a lifeline and a lie, all in one. There's one more thing, he said, his voice dropping low again. He walked to a section of the library that was shrouded in shadow. He pressed a hidden panel, and a section of the bookshelf swung inwards, revealing a small, steel safe. He spun the dial with practiced ease and opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. It was old, the corners softened with age. This, he said, holding it out to me, is her journal. She left it behind the night she fled. I've never read it. I felt I had forfeited the right. But you are her son. Perhaps the answers you truly seek are in here. I took the journal, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the worn leather. This was a piece of her, a piece of the mother I never knew, the vibrant young woman in the photograph. It felt more valuable than the blank check in my other hand. I needed to go. I needed to get back to my world, to my mom, to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred in my life. I turned to leave, my mind a whirlwind of checkbooks, untraceable trusts, and old enemies. As I reached the doorway of the library, his voice stopped me one last time. "Alex," he called out. I turned back to face him. He was standing by the fireplace, silhouetted against the flames, looking like a king in his lonely castle. The man who made that threat all those years ago. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was my partner, my closest friend, before he became my bitterest enemy. He died in a plane crash 5 years ago. Officially, he's gone. Officially? I asked, my brow furrowing. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. Alistair's expression was grim. He was a man who planned for every contingency. A man who liked to leave ghosts behind to do his bidding. Just be careful who you trust with your newfound luck. He looked down at his empty hands, a haunted expression on his face. And there's something else you should know about your mother. The reason she ran so completely. Why she erased her past so thoroughly. It wasn't just because of Thorne's threat against her. It was because she had just found out she was pregnant with you. Thorne didn't know about you. Nobody did. She wasn't just saving herself, Alex. She was protecting you. But there was another secret she was keeping, one even I didn't learn until much later. It was the true reason Thorne wanted her silenced. The weight of the journal in one hand and the blank check in the other felt like a scale, balancing a past I never knew against a future I couldn't have imagined. "Another secret?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What was it? What did she know?" Alistair looked weary, as if dredging up this final piece of the past was a monumental effort. "Before Elena, Marcus and I were inseparable. We built Sterling Thorne Industries from the ground up, but Marcus had a darkness in him. He started cutting corners, making backroom deals, laundering money for dangerous people. I was blind to it, caught up in the ambition. Elena, she worked in our accounting department. She was brilliant. She was the one who found the irregularities, a hidden ledger, evidence of everything. She came to me with it, torn about what to do, afraid of what it would mean for the company, for me." He paused, the crackling fire filling the silence. That's when he made the threat. It wasn't just about the business deal I was backing out of. That was the excuse. The real reason he threatened her was because she held the proof that could have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. She was the only one who knew where the evidence was hidden. When she disappeared, the evidence disappeared with her. I believe that's the real reason he finally stopped searching. He assumed she was gone, and his secrets were safe. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. My mother wasn't just a victim caught in the crossfire. She was a key player. She had run not only to protect her life and mine, but to bury a secret that could destroy a powerful man. My entire life of poverty and struggle had been the price of that silence. I left the mansion in a daze, the ride back down the hill a blur of pine-scented air and conflicting emotions. Anger, pity, confusion, and a strange, terrifying sense of hope warred within me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by my mother's bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the check and the journal on the nightstand like a bomb and its detonator. The next day, Alistair's banker called. He was discreet, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. A trust was established. Funds were transferred. The story we concocted was a distant relative I'd never met, leaving me a surprise inheritance. It was a flimsy tale, but my mother, in her fog of illness and fatigue, accepted it with tearful gratitude. To her it was simply a miracle. The miracle began to work. We saw a specialist, then another. They flew in from Switzerland. Tests were run. Diagnoses were made. It was a rare autoimmune disorder, but it was treatable. With the right medication and care, they said she could make a full recovery. For the first time in a decade, I saw genuine, unadulterated hope in my mother's eyes. We moved out of our cramped apartment and into a bright, comfortable house in a quiet suburb, with a garden she could sit in. I hired a full-time nurse to help care for her. Her strength began to return, slowly but surely. Color returned to her cheeks. Her smile, the same radiant smile from the photograph in the mansion, started to appear more often. Through it all, I kept my promise. Alistair Sterling was a ghost. I never spoke his name. I lived the lie, and with every passing day, the lie became my reality. One evening, months later, my mother was strong enough to sit with me in the new living room. A fire was burning in our own small fireplace. I had been reading her journal in secret, piece by piece. It was filled with her love for Alistair, her hopes for their future, and then her terror as she uncovered Marcus Thorne's crimes. The final entry was a hastily scrawled, tear-blotted farewell. I have to run. For the baby. For my little Alex. It's the only way to keep him safe. I will hide this journal, the one thing I have from Ali. Maybe one day my son will find it and understand. But she hadn't hidden the journal. In her haste, she had left it behind. Tucked into a small pocket on the inside back cover was a tiny key and a slip of paper with a string of numbers. Alex, my mother said, her voice clearer and stronger than it had been in years. She touched a photo I had placed on our mantel, a new one of the two of us, taken in our garden. All this, it feels like a dream. I feel like I'm finally waking up after a long, long nightmare. You deserve it, Mom, I said, my voice thick with emotion. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her expression turning serious. Something I should have told you years ago, about your father. My heart stopped. I held my breath, ready for the truth to finally come from her lips. He was a good man, she began, a man named Alistair. I loved him very much. But his world was dangerous. There was another man, his partner, Marcus Thorne. He was evil, Alex. He threatened us. I had discovered things. Terrible things he had done. I had evidence. I ran to protect you, but also to protect that evidence. She looked at me, her eyes clear. I memorized the location, a safe deposit box. The key is lost. I think I lost it the night I ran. The evidence is gone forever, but at least we are safe. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where I now kept the small key from the journal. It wasn't lost. It was here. Alistair was wrong. The evidence hadn't disappeared. My mother had been its guardian all along, holding the secret in her memory. Marcus Thorne might be dead, but his network, his ghosts, as Alistair called them, could still be out there. Releasing that evidence could still bring danger, but it could also bring justice. It could finally close the book on the fear that had dictated my mother's life. Later that week, I drove back up to Sterling Hill. The gates opened for me without question. I found Alistair in his library, looking out the same window. I placed the small key and the slip of paper on the polished table beside him. She didn't lose the evidence, I said. She protected it. She memorized the details. I told him everything. He picked up the key, his hand trembling. He looked at me, a flicker of the old powerful billionaire returning to his eyes. With this, he said softly, we can dismantle what's left of Thorne's network. We can finally make things right. He looked at me, a question in his gaze. She's getting better? Every day, I said. She's starting to live again. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. Good. We didn't need to say more. An understanding passed between us. The lie would hold. He would remain her ghost, the anonymous benefactor who had saved her life. It was his penance, and perhaps his redemption. He would use his power and the long-buried evidence to quietly clean up the mess from his past, ensuring no shadows would ever touch our lives again. My mother never learned the full truth about her miracle inheritance. She lived out her days in peace and comfort, her health restored, her spirit bright. She would often tell me stories about the kind, brilliant man she once loved, a man from a different life. I would listen, holding the secret of his sacrifice in my heart. My life was no longer about a 10-block radius of cracked pavement. It was a life my mother had bought for me with her silence, and my father had secured with his wealth. And in the quiet moments I knew that even though they were worlds apart, their love had, in the end, saved us all.